Hi, welcome. This is Glenda Dawson and LD from Glenda's Dragon's Den. We are live on the Conscious Awakening Network on Roku TV, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, on YouTube, on Facebook, and so many other social medias and streaming platforms. Today we have a very special guest who has graciously accepted our invitation. He is the state director of the Michigan chapter of the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, since 2004. Welcome, Bill. How are you today?
Thanks for having me on. I feel great.
Thank you for being had.
He started already. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I live in Clawson, Michigan, which is a suburb of northern Detroit. I've lived in the southeastern Detroit area my whole life. I had a fairly normal childhood, except for the UFO stuff. And then when I was in my early 20s, back in the 1990s, I discovered the Mutual UFO Network 30 years ago now. And so I've been a member of MUFON for 30 years and state director for Michigan for the last 19. And yeah, it's never a dull moment in the UFO field.
So you kind of mentioned some of the UFO stuff in your childhood. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. My very first memory in life, and I mean very first memory in life, is being age 2 in my crib at night. I hadn't yet fallen asleep. The house was dark, and a little gray guy came into my room. A little gray being, very thin, very big black eyes, and stared down at me from the foot of the crib. Was there for several moments. I called for my parents, and I screamed for my parents. And my mom, I remember, she just kept saying, "Go back to sleep, go back to sleep." I'm like, "I am not asleep." And after a moment, the thing stepped out of the room. I'm not sure where it went. Part of me assumed that it was going into one of my brother's rooms, older brothers. And then that was, yeah, like I said, this wasn't anything that was burned into, pardon me, this wasn't anything that I remembered years later, like, oh, yeah, I think that happened. It burned into my memory the night it happened, and I've never forgotten it. And it wouldn't take long for more experiences. The next remembered one I have is actually age 4, and it was during the daytime. My brothers, I have 4 older brothers. They were all off at school. My father was off at work. My mom was home, but she was outside digging weeds. It was in the middle of the afternoon, and I was, while my mom was out there, I decided I was going to take a nap. And so I went to my room, and right when I laid on the bed, like the very instant, I was instantly paralyzed. And then it felt like somebody plucked me out of body, like almost like pulling a handkerchief out of a pocket. And there in the room with me were 3 little gray guys. And I, pardon me, I wasn't aware of what was going on with regards to the out of body state. But looking back, it was very clear what was going on. And they wanted to see how I operated in that form. They took me out into the hallway. I lived in a tri-level home, and my bedroom was on the top floor. And then they wanted me to see how I operated, and in that state, how much control I had. So they wanted me to float down the stairs to the room down below. And so the sort of telepathic message that I received was to lay on my stomach, which I didn't have a stomach, but I I understood the concept. Pardon me, a little scratch. So I floated down the stairs and landed in a sort of a falling leaf pattern in the room below. And when I looked around, the beings were there and they were very happy, very excited. Like, this is great. Look what you just did. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go tell my mom. And they're like, oh, no, 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 that's okay. That's okay. You don't need to tell anybody. In fact, don't tell anybody. So I thought that was really strange. And then popped me back into my body. I got up. I looked around the house for them. I didn't see them. And so I thought, well, let me try that going down the stairs thing while I'm in this.
Uh-oh.
Yep. So I went up to the stairs, the top of the stairs, and crawled down the stairs face first. And it's not the same experience. Um, and so I didn't tell anybody for several years about that one. Um, ultimately, I did. Before jumping ahead to any further experiences, I'll mention that my oldest brothers, pardon me, my two oldest brothers have a high number of unusual encounters, both of them. And then the next two brothers, between them, zero, not a single one.
Hmm.
And which I think is really odd. So there was a rule in my house growing up that my brothers couldn't talk about what was going on with them around me. They didn't want to influence me, they didn't want to scare me. But should I come to them with what had happened to me, they could listen sympathetically and say, "Oh, okay, okay," and not treat me like I was crazy. So when I had my next experience, it was at age 7, the next remembered one, and I still have a scar on my arm from that experience.
Mm.
I was laying in bed, and this black sort of void appeared over the top of my bed. Just opened up this circle, and this metallic rope thing sort of dropped down out of the ceiling, started whipping around erratically, giving off this sort of electric charge. And I felt my body vibrating. I was being charged up, I felt. And then I found myself in a very small room in some kind of structure. I assume flying saucer, but that's an assumption. And there were two gray guys in there with me, and the room had like like a black light effect. And I felt that because I believe they were conveying to me
Mhm.
that they needed to sort of cleanse me, or I needed to get in frequency, some sort of thing. They needed to uh, acclimate me to the next room where I would be headed. And so after a little bit, they let me into the next room. And these two grays were met by a third gray. And in the middle of the room was what appeared to be a bed. And I'm like, oh, they're going to want me to lay on the bed. But then instead of asking me to do that, they left the room. They took a door off to the left. And I thought, well, if you guys are going to the left, I'm going to go to the right. And so I went to a door on the right of the room, and then I found myself in a long, winding hallway. And so I just kept walking, and there were doors to my left. And I kept going until there was a door in front of me, and the door slid open, and there was some sort of what looked like a machine contraption inside, almost kind of reminded me of a furnace, almost like they would
Mm.
have a furnace on their UFO. But so I turned around and discovered that they had been following me this whole time.
Mm.
They were kind of nonplussed. They were like, "Oh, let's see where he goes. See what happens." And then they ushered me into a room. Now that I was facing it the other direction, it was now on my right. And the 3 foot tall beings that escorted me in there brought me to a 5 foot tall being who looked essentially identical to them, but just a couple feet taller. And this being that was taller seemed to have a greater um, understanding of people.
Mhm.
Kind of hard to say. Um, Even though the shorter grays were nice enough, I got this feeling that they weren't completely on the same level as us. Like there was something amiss. But the 5 foot one was able to communicate telepathically,
Mhm.
but effectively. And I'm like, okay, good. Somebody I can sort of communicate with. And so he wanted me to sit in this chair, looked like a dentist chair, and I knew that I really didn't have much choice in the matter, and I sat in it. And as I sat in it, I felt magnetically attached to it, like I
Hmm.
was stuck to it. There were no harnesses. I just could not move from this chair. And then the being got close to my face and said, "Be really good, and you'll get to see the color blue." And I'm like, "Color blue?" Kids usually get suckers, right? Or stickers. Yeah, you get to see the color blue. I'm like, "Okay, these don't know kids very well." So, and then right at that moment, I felt a really sharp pain in my right arm, and I look over and there's a slice there across my arm. And I look down and I see it healing as I watch. It's healing up, it's scarring up immediately right when I look at it. And so I look back at the being as if to say, "What the heck did you just do?" And his face is right in mine, and its big black eyes suddenly, like a light is switched, turn a bright cerulean blue, and boom. And it was tranquilizing, it was mesmerizing. I was in this like beautiful stupor from these beautiful eyes that were just sending these waves of relaxation and whatever and numbness. And then I woke up the next morning, and first thing, of course, I look over and there's now a scar on my arm that wasn't there before. And later on that day in the afternoon, I'm in my backyard playing with my friend across the street. I'm 7 at the time, he's 6, and we're just basically climbing trees in my backyard. When this mist rolls into the backyard, it's kind of like smoke machine fog. It's not smoke, because at first I thought, "Oh my gosh, somebody's barbecue is out of control or whatever," but it was a very fine, very cool mist, and in that mist was a little gray guy. Pardon me so much. So and the being says to me telepathically, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And then it seemed satisfied, and it continued walking with the cloud, big cloud around it. The being and the cloud rolled into the next door neighbor's yard, into the yard after that, and kept going. And my friend didn't see the little gray guy in the smoke, the fog, but to this day, he remembers when we were back there and the fog came through. He very
Hmm.
clearly remembers the fog, but he just didn't see the little guy inside of it. And then, my teen years, I had many, many experiences. In my 20s, a great deal of experiences. They seem to taper off for the most part after that, though not completely. Um, when I found MUFON in '93, I decided that I would look back with regression at some of the things that had happened to me before that. And I took really good notes, excuse me, and I put out my first book about my experiences, called Experiencer Raised in Two Worlds. And at the time, there were a lot of books out there. My first book about the subject was Communion. And w- up to that point, up until Communion, I really didn't know the context to put my experiences into. I
Right.
wasn't really sure how I could describe what was happening. And this book was just, to me, it was just like, yep, 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 turning the page. Yep. I had something like that happen to me. And then after that, I started reading more material. And in some of the books, particularly Bud Hopkins, he had a way of including children into some of the released studies that he had in print, where he would talk about NTV and other places. He would talk about, this is what a child experiences when they have this type of phenomenon. And I thought, well, there isn't a book out at the time that I was aware. There have been other books since then that really talked about what it was like growing up as a child from a firsthand perspective. And so I thought it would be useful to collect my notes and put them into a book and talk about what it was like being raised in two worlds. And then in my early 20s, a whole different thing started to happen to me. Growing up to that point, when I was very young, they seemed to just want to interact with me, sort of bond with me.
Mhm.
In my
Groom you?
teens,
Would you reflect on that as possibly grooming behavior?
well, sure. When I was really little, they wanted to sort of, like I said, bond with me. It was like like they understood enough about what children are into, so that when they would come visit me later, I would be more amenable to them, because I know in this community, those experiencers whose first remembered experiences are from their teens or later, they never quite seem to be okay, completely okay. You get to a certain point in life where you learn what's supposed to be there, what's not supposed to be there, how things are supposed to be in our place in the universe, and then bam, this crazy thing happens to you. Um, and so I think they know, the beings, that if you want to really have a smooth interaction with people, that you got to start as young as you can. And it makes perfect logical sense. And because especially my experiences in my teen, it was mostly all about my body, what they could learn from my body, and it was just very uncomfortable. And that sort of niceness they had, that playfulness when I was younger, went away, and it was like all business. Like, get on board, you know, we're doing this. Now you're gone. And I didn't feel a connection with them so much during that time, because it wasn't the same. They didn't seem to, they dropped all pretenses, and they just were like, okay, this is what we're doing. It's nothing but doctor visits. And when I got into my early 20s, like right around 20, um, they greeted me as an adult in a way. It was, they sort of pulled back on the heavy-handedness, the all business approach that they had before, and seemed to want to interact with me at a certain level of age that I had gotten to. And they were very much into what I was going to do with my life, who I was going to be with in my adult life. It seemed like things were entering into a new phase. Like, let's see who you're going to be as an adult. Let's figure this out.
Hmm.
And we're going to play a big part in it for you, as if that's a favor for me. One very noteworthy encounter that I had, I think that really highlights this time of my life, as this was a phase of lots of dating. And um, when you have this type of experience and you're dating, at some point you have to tell the person you're dating that this is going on in your life. One, of course, just make sure they don't think you're crazy. But if you go too long, they're going to be part of an experience.
Hmm.
And So this one girl I'd been dating for about 2 months, I hadn't yet told her about the contact stuff, and this is back in 1995.
Hmm.
And we decided one day we were going to go hiking through this smaller park. I mean, big enough to hike, but local in the Detroit metro area, southeastern Michigan. And we spent a good time there during the day, and then we're like, oh, let's watch the sun go down. Oh, let's stargaze. And we had a blanket that we laid on a hill at the edge of the park, and we were very much alone. And as we were laying there in the blanket, it was May of 95, and the crickets weren't out, but the frogs were, and you could hear them in the background, and like little branches falling off trees and things like that. And then everything went silent, and then we could hear footsteps coming up the hill,
Hmm.
which spooked us. And we stood up, went to the center of the hill, looked around, didn't see anybody. And then she points up at the sky and she says, like, "Oh, look, it's the Big Dipper." And I respond, "Oh, that's the Little Dipper, actually. I know because I have an astronomy class I just finished taking, and we learned about that, and we started talking about the price of textbooks, and then things seemed to be okay. So we went and laid back down on the blanket, and the noises were there, and then all of a sudden, everything went quiet, and we heard footsteps walking up the hill. And, this is how I remember it, so I can only tell you it the way I remember it. I can't tell you that this is that this necessarily makes sense. I'm just telling you what I remember.
Mhm.
So, when that happened and we went to the center of the hill, I'm like, "Something strange about that." I didn't remember that we had just done it at that moment. We had heard the steps and went to the center of the hill. So then she says, "Oh, look, it's the Big Dipper." And I'm like, "Little Dipper," and then we talked about price of textbooks, and then, of course, we went back and laid on the blanket. A couple moments later, steps up the hill, we
Mm.
go to the center of the hill, and I'm like, I'm having this terrible sense of deja vu, and then she says, "Look, it's the Big Dipper," and then I'm like, "Oh my gosh, we're reliving the same moment again and
Oh.
again," and then time froze. We froze. We both completely froze, and we were standing facing each other. And yep, sure enough, three little gray guys come up the hill. They seem to be mostly ignoring me. They walked up and around her, and they're looking her up and down. And I could hear their telepathic banter, like, "No, not her. Mm-mm, no, she's no good. No, she's not the one. No, this one's not going to work for us. No." And then, and then they went down the hill, and then when they did, we could move again. We were unfrozen, and so we ran and grabbed our stuff and ran as fast as we could out the park. I bet you we ran very nearly a mile, well, half mile at least. So, and then we got to the car, and we drove off in silence, not talking to each other. And so I was driving her home, and as we got close to her place, she said, "I'm not ready to be dropped off yet. Can we go someplace?" Meaning kind of like, can we go any place? And so we went to Meyer Thrifty Acres, a big box store at the time, open 24 hours. And we walked up and down the aisles of the store looking at mops and cans of food and tacky clothing just to sort of ground ourselves in normalcy. Pardon me. And then we eventually made our way into the pet department, and we sat there and watched the hamsters that were active because it was late and they were doing their thing. And it was good to watch them and have that sort of sense of like, normalcy return. And then after a little bit, she said, "Okay, I think I can go home now." So I drove her home, dropped her off. We didn't talk at all the next day. And then 2 days later, she calls and says, "Come over." And when I did, right away, she breaks up. And while I didn't tell her that we had been through had anything to do with me, I knew she knew that it had everything to do with me. And so I was like, "Oh gosh, I missed that window here." But based upon their perceptions of her, I don't think that they would have made it easy for us because whatever it was about her, they sure didn't like her.
Mm.
So, just so I'm clear, all of these were consistently grays, all of these
Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah, there was only one other type of being that I'd experienced, and that was a mantis being, and that's going back into my youth again. Um, One of the things when I was younger, I was always on guard against them. I would try to stay up as late as possible, try to stay with other people as much as I could, didn't want to be alone. And in my room, I set up an obstacle course. That's exactly what it was. I had a snare drum stick sort of wedged on the dresser that was by my door. So if a door tried to open, it could only open so far before it hit the stick. I would usually have a light on, either TV or a radio. Um, I had a fan blowing on me so that in case I closed my eyes and they tried to come to me, I could feel the break in the breeze and know that somebody was there. And I also had my floor littered with stuff, so that they would hopefully trip over it and not be able to get to me easily. I closed the shutter on the window and the curtains so that they couldn't recon the room, and know it was time to come in and get me. And when I could get the family dog in to stay the night, I would do that. And I don't think any of it had any effect whatsoever. And so while they were being more harsh and callous, in my opinion, with me, I was being more resistant to them, and besides the fact I was a teenager anyway,
Right.
so it goes with the territory. And one night they brought me on board and brought me in front of a mantis. And when I say mantis, I mean this thing looked like a praying mantis. And while the beings, the grays, if they were 3 feet, they were 5 feet. They had sort of a tight fitting outfit on, but this mantis had, I used to sort of compare it to like a graduation robe, but it's probably more accurate to say it was like a cheap, tacky Dungeons and Dragons wizard costume. It was really garish and looked silly on this like scary looking face that was at the top of it. And this being had such intense, immense power. It was just, it was difficult to be in the room with it. And the being said, go along with the program and you will reap the benefits. You will understand why we're doing what we're doing and you will appreciate it. And I'm like, uh, okay. So I felt like basically I was 16 at the time. I felt like I was being brought in front of the principal to be scared straight. And so I don't know that I was much better after that, but it was a scary experience.
Mhm.
And, I had come to an assumption that the mantis being who was 7 feet tall, we're going up in a couple feet increments here, that the being that was 7 feet tall, the mantis was an authority. There basically, if there was a hierarchy, the 3 foot grays were much like blue collar, the 5 foot were white collar, the 7 foot mantis being was management. But it could have just been, they brought me in front of their pet bear to scare me. I don't know. It was very scary. Um, and that was the last time that I had seen that. Otherwise, it's mostly been all about the grays. And then there's a period in my life, like the first half of my 20s, seemed they were very invasive in a social way, very much guiding me career wise, friend wise, relationship wise. And they kept poking and prodding me until they felt that they got the recipe right. And then they dropped back in a great degree. The My second book, Two Worlds Collide, is Experiencer Two Worlds Collide, is about these two worlds, coming together, then them trying to make me into to who they wanted me to be. And part of that is I think they wanted me to talk about the things that had happened, and so I do. And that I was already a member of MUFON in the midst of that strange time. So I had besides my family, I had a network of other people that were there for support. And as I started to come out with some of these stories, they were very recent and very scary. But over the course of now 20 plus years, 30 years almost, telling these stories to other people within MUFON, it's very cathartic, very helpful to just tell these stories, get it off my chest. Had you asked me about the thing that happened on the Hill back in '95, a couple weeks after it happened, I don't know if I could do it. But after all these years, I continue to tell these stories and listen to other people's stories, and try to keep an open dialogue going in the experiencer community to the best that my humble self can try to promote that, and and try to keep going from there. I really think that the best thing for an experiencer is to talk to another experiencer.
Mhm.
Regression's fine, if you get somebody that's good. A sympathetic ear is fine as well. And I really am of the belief that no two people's experiences are the same. We each have our own personal filters, and that can color the experiences we have to a great degree. And I really think that everybody who is an experiencer has their own personal journey. And when you ask other people for help, you're going to receive help from their filtered experience and
Mm.
their wisdom and the knowledge that they've acquired. But yeah, there's going to be no people that have the two people, they have the same experience, much like all advice in life. You ask
Mhm.
advice from some people, not so much from others. I ask advice about how to floss from my dentist, not my mechanic. You know,
Right.
a- and and so it's good to have that open communication, but it's also good to have an open mind, not be judgmental of other people's experiences,
Mhm.
because they're not going to be the same. I've spoken with hundreds of other experiencers now by this point, and then you have to really understand that deeply, that you're not going to find that other person like, yes, we check all the same boxes. You can get close, and that's really something. But this is a personal journey that everybody has to walk, and you really have to embrace the mystery. There are more questions than answers.
Right. At least it's healing, I feel, if you do speak about it, because then you don't feel so alone and so isolated. Even if the experiences were not the same, there are things that are in common. Like you saw the grays, a lot of people see the grays, and they see the two different types of grays. If I believe correctly, it was a friend of mine who actually saw one that was like 6 feet tall. So it, I don't know if it's like they get older and they get taller, but or they know they, like you say, they go up in status. But I have been very blessed to have had people talk about it and willing to talk about it.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel that everyone that has had one of these experiences, or any one or many, the more you talk about it, the more healing you receive, and
Hmm.
more acknowledgement that you're not the only one, you're not going crazy, that you're just not out there all by yourself.
And you are an experiencer.
Yes, I am an experiencer.
Bill, I got to ask you because as you're talking, it's going through my mind. The time frame you're in, it seems to me there was a movie that came out called Starship Troopers.
Hmm.
Are you familiar with it?
Yep. Read the book, saw the movie.
Is it possible that you saw the movie or read the book before you had that experience with the mantis being? And could the gray have projected that image into you to get your attention?
Yeah, sure, fair enough. What year did that movie come out? Because it feels like I was aware of the movie coming out, and that's when I read the book, and I was slightly dissatisfied with the movie because of that. Um, Obviously, the book came out a long time ago, 97. Okay, is when the movie was. So if I had my experience in 87, that would have predated that by
Right.
10 years. And what's interesting too is shortly after that, when I got Strieber's communion, he not only talks about a very similar being, but he also calls it a mantis.
Hmm.
And that was one of the things that really floored me about his book was that, I'm like, that is a chilling coincidence. And then from then on, I learned that it's fairly common. I have a sketch somewhere of my friend, late friend David Kaywood. He's like, "Oh yeah, this showed up at my house." I was like, "Holy cow, that's the mantis!" And he's like, "Yeah, that's what we call it, the mantis." And it's a common term for them, as common as I think calling the grays gray. Sometimes people will say, there's a weird sort of gray that kind of looks like a bug, but most of the time people refer to it as a mantis.
Mhm.
So it's common, and it's I think I have to add in too, when you talk about like the bugs from Starship Troopers, it's not like people pull things from the media and and I'm going to put on my MUFON hat here and the stuff that people report to us. It's not like people report like ET the extraterrestrial came to visit them, or a Klingon, or Chewbacca. There is a common form,
Mhm.
and you could say, well, Close Encounters was back in the 70s, but these sightings of these type of beings predate even that. I mean, the movie got it from what people were seeing, not the other way around. And sure enough, by the time you got to the 90s, these little alien faces were everywhere, to the exclusion of almost everything else. And so I feel blessed in a sense to have had these experiences prior to potential pollution from what's out there in the media, um, so that I know that they're parroting what I had in my experiences. I'm not pulling from what I'm seeing out there and shoehorning it into my experiences.
I
I did.
wasn't trying to assert in any
Mm,
way that you were doing that. I
uh-huh.
was thinking that perhaps they pulled that from you and used that possibly as a way to intimidate you.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Because I'm a huge Joseph Campbell uh, fan, and him being the godfather of Star Wars and all the work he did uh, on the development of the aha moments in different parts of the world in ancient civilizations and how possibly that could have occurred. I wonder too if some of the people then writing this stuff didn't either have the experiences themselves or have the benefit of a Joseph Campbell to give them that background to create that image in Hollywood. It's always curious to me how this evolves. It just seems that maybe that's something the Greys do because they realize on this planet, the praying mantis, I love you, but I'm going to bite your head off when we're done. Uh,
Yeah. Hmm.
so that would be, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if they can at least give you that projection that that's what you're looking at. If indeed, if that's not in fact what you're looking at, I'm open to all of that. So I just wanted to try and get the benefit of your experience as to because it does seem if I came in front of a 7 foot praying mantis, I first wish would be that I'm female, because the males don't fare too well. But you see where I'm going with this?
Sure. Yeah. 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 There's no. I mean, something that terrifying. The only knowledge you have of it is again that those little bits that you're aware of how brutal these little insects are, and
Mhm.
then to see that you're even smaller than them, yeah, it's pretty chilling.
Mhm. Now, were you able to? I know you said that your family was open to all that because your brothers did experience your two eldest brothers did experience. Uh, were you able to speak about that one particular experience? Or were you so traumatized that you kind of held onto it for a while?
No, I didn't hold on to it. I actively communicated it to my family and the close friends I had at school that I knew were open to the subject.
Right.
Um, yeah, I found surprisingly that, knock on whatever, I never exceeded that safe zone. I never told the wrong person and had it come back to bite me. My family's obviously been empathetic, not just sympathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody else in my life has been 110% supportive at work. People come up to me and say, I read your book, or they're like, oh, let me tell you about this UFO I saw. So I've been blessed by
Mm.
the ability to talk about it. And I'm always reminded when I speak to a new experience, or I haven't met before. They're like, I don't know who to talk about this with, and then I realize I'm like, oh gosh, that sort of liberty that I sometimes take for granted, just to open my mouth and start talking about it. A lot of people have to keep it closed up. And so yeah, I realize because I can speak about it, I probably should, and therefore I do.
And it's good because you are blessed that you can do that. A lot of people find themselves a little hesitant because they don't know if they're going to be put away or
Mhm.
taken,
Ah,
And my
disappeared.
experience
Hmm.
in mental health is that I sort of served at the time I was on the boards uh, to open people up to the fact that this may not necessarily be all mental illness. And I actually sat down with one of our office personnel in Albany and gave her the opportunity to disclose to me if she wanted to do so, because I had a feeling that she had experienced and didn't have anyone to talk to about it. And that was only problematic because I was a board member and she was an employee, and it didn't become a huge challenge, but you know it, I was better off with a group setting than I was on the one-on-one there. um, I do. We're almost three-quarters of the way through the show. I do want to ask you, what's the one thing you wish people would ask you about MUFON?
wow, that's a good question. Um, and it's not a question I obviously I'm asked very often. Uh, um, but I would say when you join an organization or group, you want to it'd be nice to know what you're getting into. A lot of people join MUFON, and after they come to a meeting, after the first meeting, a lot of times it's like, I had no idea. I had no idea it was this good. I had no idea that the people were this weird. I had no idea that that this would be an open opportunity for me to just share with like-minded people. I had no idea, whatever. So I think one question that I always like to be asked is, because I have a lot of people that say, hey, guess what? I joined the international organization. I bought the field investigator manual. I'm going to take the test. And, I'm like, okay, maybe you should have a moment to acquaint yourself with our culture. So I think the question, I guess, would be best phrased is like, what is the MUFON community like? And we're a very open-minded group. Um, People always have opinions. So you'll always hear MUFON is this, MUFON is that. MUFON is good, MUFON is bad, MUFON is whatever. And we're an all volunteer army. We're 5,000 plus members in over 40 countries. and we all bring ourselves with us. And there are within the organization some very nuts and bolts people that seem to be um, very constrictive in their views. There are some people that are so open minded, you could tell them anything, and they're like, oh, yeah, sounds good. And people who've had experiences at a very deep level, at a marginal level, people that know that they're just curious and are going to hang around for just a short while, and people are like, I found my home. I mean, we're all sorts of things. So it's kind of a pet peeve of mine when people say, oh, move on is this, or like
Mm.
move on is that. I'm like, yeah, I mean, we're a group of people, we're a group of 5,000 people. We're everything,
Right.
we're all kinds of people. And we have an interest in UFOs, and that interest in UFOs can vary. Some people are just interested in lights in the sky. Some people are just interested in contact experiences. And when you come in to this culture of MUFON, I really stress, when you come to that first meeting, you bring yourself into this culture, and your point of view is as valid as anybody else's.
Mhm.
And if you don't like something about MUFON, change it, work to change it, become involved. If you see improvements to be made, um, don't think, "Oh, that person should improve MUFON." I have these issues with MUFON. We don't meet enough. You need to meet more. You know, and to that, when I always say is like, "Oh, if you'd like to set up, personal meeting, you can. There's nothing stopping you. If you need any help setting that up." Really, it's just that, um, we're about as open-minded, eclectic group that does good work. I will say this about our investigative team: we get over 200 sightings a month,
Mm.
and we can identify, depending on pardon me, did I say month? We get 200 sightings a year.
Mm.
And depending on, the time frame, and the a number of investigators available, we can identify usually anywhere between 80 to 95% of what comes into us. And so we're not trying to promote um, an extraterrestrial hypothesis as an organization.
Mhm.
As the public face of the organization, we try to identify what that people see that they can't identify. And when I say 95% can't be identified, that means in a year where we get 200 sightings, we have 10 good sightings that we don't know what they are. And, you could do some armchair speculation from there, and people do, because people have different opinions. And that's where, a lot of the fun is trying to figure this out. When I talk about my personal experiences, I speak for myself. I don't speak on behalf of MUFON. The work I do for MUFON, I view essentially as charity work, because it's a way to help people who encounter this phenomena at all different levels,
Right.
not just the level that I've experienced it through my life. And I like to think that those of us in the organization who are witnesses to truly anomalous events,
Mhm.
are participants in contact, that we in fact represent the most critical group possible, because we know that something is going on. And so when somebody reports something to us, we're not like, well, this phenomena is impossible. This could never happen. So I'm just going to dismiss it, because we know something's going on. But we're not, and but on the other side of that, we're not going to just openly accept everything, because we've had some sort of phenomena in our life. We can say, yes, that feels authentic, having had experiences ourselves, and use the scientific tools that MUFON provides to bring it all together and see if we can figure out what people have seen, and if they are in a situation where they're in a bad spot emotionally. Probably you're going to find somebody within the organization who's gone through something similar enough, that can be there to have a talk about it, and network. Again, like I said earlier, the best thing for an experiencer is to talk to another experiencer. Same goes with UFO witnesses on that level, across the board.
Well, to open-mindedness, both Glenda and I, when people ask us, how do we define paranormal? We say define normal, and then some of them will, and everything else. So yeah, pretty much. Um, Now, why you?
Well, it's why me having the contact experience.
Mhm.
The estimates of the number of people who have this type of thing happen to them are pretty high, like surprisingly high. Sometimes you'll hear even estimates of millions of people have had this happen to them. Um, I can't, by extrapolating the number of people who have reported it versus a certain populations, whatever. And I'm not prepared to necessarily go out that far on a limb, but clearly, pardon me, clearly many, many thousands of people have had this happen to them. And so when you look at that big of a pool of individuals, I just happen to fall into that minority. um, I don't think I'm, a special flower by any stretch. Um, the thing that makes me unique in this space is that I can talk about it, and the what's happened to me has fascinated me so much that I can't drop it. I always say, like, there's two big questions on Earth, right? What happens after we die, and are we alone in the universe? Why not spend your time looking into one of those? I mean, 'cause it's one of the big questions. What better way to spend your time? And so, like I said, I don't think I'm special. It runs on my mom's side of the family. I will say that. So I think that's how I got it, how I caught it.
Mhm.
Um, but so many people have had this happen. I think that's the real thing that people need to realize is that a lot more people have this happening than they think.
Mhm.
Well, the reason why I went there, and again, you mentioned that you have two brothers who are experiences out of five, uh,
Yeah.
and so the why you wasn't to say that you're the only one, but out of a percentage of the global population, would it be fair to say maybe 10% are experiencers, or do you think it's higher? Or
Hmm. I'm always leery to buy into any sort of excuse me, so estimates of the phenomena. One of
Mhm,
the issues is that depending on the types of phenomena somebody's encountered, it could be interpreted as spirit,
mhm,
you know, maybe even cryptid, and could be, construed as extraterrestrial. It all depends on the person's understanding of the paranormal,
Mhm.
and there's a whole lot of things that could bump the numbers.
mhm,
And sure, maybe some of that percentage, if it is like a 10%, maybe some of those are actually encountering spirits or cryptids, and it's a tough thing to put a lock on. But I will say this, on a very grassroots level,
Mhm.
when you're at a party, n- excuse me, not necessarily a party of people who are in the community, but just a general party, bring up the topic and see how many people have stories. You'd be surprised, at any party, there's going to be somebody talking about it. And so I don't think 10% is unreasonable based upon my experience. When what I do comes up at parties and people start sharing their stories, yeah, I think it's a higher normal than people think.
yeah,
Mhm.
I think those numbers are difficult to calculate. Like in mental health, it's supposedly 1 out of 3. I happen to feel it's much higher. Again, just being someone that people will come to at a party and speak with about it. So, I was running 10% as kind of a low ball,
Hmm,
but I was
yeah.
just curious if you had any thoughts on that. We are coming up on 5 minutes left, and you got a lot of stuff coming up to promote.
Yes.
Oh,
You're going to
sure.
be with Tim Malley on the 4th. Is Tim going to be there?
Oh, yeah, of course he is. Yep.
Well, I
And
mean, I don't know that he makes all the events.
mhm.
I know he's been doing this for a while. So you want to mention a little bit about the photographs?
Very good.
Sure. The event is to benefit the Humane Society, and so it's a lot of great paranormal speakers. Also, a lot of you could get a psychic reading when you're there. All sorts of great things for a great cause. And the event is at the Wyndham Garden Hotel in Ann Arbor, which is where MUFON had its 2016 Swamp Gas Conference. And so it's a tremendous venue. It's
Mhm.
perfect for something like this, and I'm really looking forward to it. The presentation I'm going to give is called "The Coolest UFO Project You've Probably Never Heard of," and I don't like to say too much about it ahead of time because I
Sure.
think the presentation itself is worth experiencing. And I did it at the UFO Contact Conference in September last year, which I'm always a part of, and it went over very well. And so I'm happy to be doing that again. And Michigan MUFON meets sometimes via Zoom and sometimes in person. And March 12th, we are meeting in person at Zender's Splash Village. No, we're not going on the water slides or going for the all you can eat chicken. If you want to do that and you're there, go for it. But our meeting's going to be at that hotel, and Mary Bassett, our state regressionist
Mhm.
for Michigan MUFON, a wonderful individual and does tremendous work. So blessed to have her. She's actually going to be doing a live regression for us as part of that meeting, and you can attend. You can attend in person. Just go to the website mimufon.org for more details on that. Those are the things I got coming up immediately.
Now, at the photographs, will you be bringing books to sign?
Yep, yep. I
Okay.
have, if you don't mind me,
No, go
Not
ahead.
at all.
the books. so so I have my 2 books here, and I'll have other books for sale that'll make that you'll be able to see when you get there.
And you'll
Mhm.
be signing them at request.
Yes, absolutely.
And I believe, will be seeing you in
September.
September.
Yes. We're
At
going.
UFO Contact.
Yeah. Yeah.
I understand that you're going to be speaking there.
Oh, yes, yeah. I'll be at the Little Traverse Bay Parafest at the end of April,
Mhm.
and Chaos Con in June are another couple conferences that I'll be speaking at, and then the Michigan Paracon in August.
Well, let's get your personal contact up there in case people have something they don't want to publicly disclose. And then we'll get your, they can also reach you through the MUFON uh,
Yes.
contact. Now, but we are going to that UFO contact, so we will actually get to face you,
Yes.
hopefully, and
That's
pick
an
up a
amazing
couple of
event.
your signed books.
Yes. Definitely.
Please. Thank you.
So I want to thank you for being so open with us. Is there anything else you want to mention before we run out of time?
I always say if you see a UFO, please report it to MUFON. If you want to investigate UFOs, there's no better place to do it than MUFON. So, yep, go to MUFON.com to find out more and report your sighting.
And I just
Yeah.
want to make it clear, MUFON is not a government organization. It is a totally independent,
Volunteered.
volunteer manned, open to disclosure, uh, friendly organization.
Yes.
Well, thank you again. It's been a pleasure, and I can't wait to meet face to face. Just want to let everyone know next week's guests are Tracy Todd and Susan Todd. Susan is a medium and a paranormal investigator, and Tracy is a paranormal investigator and founder of the Emerald Coast Paranormal Concepts Group. So in Florida. So thank you, everyone. God bless.
And Bill, if you'd stay on for a moment after we
Oh, sure.
sign off the live, please.
Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.